Hey, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Going to wait a few minutes and give some people time to join in. I think we had 11 people sign up, 11 or 12. So we'll give it about 2 or 3 minutes and then we will jump into the presentation. If you have questions, please try and use the Q&A feature and you can write those throughout the presentation as it goes along. We will respond. If it's something easy, Rachel, who's here, will help us respond directly. If not, we'll save all the questions for the end of the presentation and then can answer those. So it'll be just a few minutes. All right, just going to repeat myself again. For those of you that are just joining, thanks for joining today. We will get started in just another minute here at 12:03. If you have questions, go ahead and use the Q&A button feature. Try to use that and not the chat, but we will check everything. If you have questions during the presentation, go ahead and write them down. We're not going to stop mid-presentation. We'll go through all the questions at the end, and if it's something easy to answer, our team will answer it directly, and then if it needs to be answered later, we'll go through them all so everybody can hear all the questions that are answered that are asked after the presentation. So we've got 7 people, 7 or 6, had about 11 sign up, so we'll go ahead and get started in just a minute. All right. Well, thanks for coming to this second meeting for our shared micromobility pilot program. My name's Adam Lind. I'll be the main presenter and I'll introduce our team here in a minute. Today, we're going to give a presentation that's going to talk a little bit about the background of this project, first and last mile connectivity, explain exactly what micromobility is, and then talk about how the city is proposing to initiate this pilot project and how we're going to manage the program during that period and what the next steps will be. And then we'll open for questions and discussion afterwards. So as I mentioned, I'm Adam Lind, the bicycle and pedestrian coordinator for the city. John Ferruzzi is not here with us today, but he is the mobility and innovation manager. And Derek Fern is here as our parking and transportation demand management coordinator. And then Rachel will be helping us from our communications team. So to jump right into the presentation, this project really started in the early 2019 and then early 2020 when our transportation committee went through a project looking at how to solve this first mile, last mile connection. And so that's really about how to get people from their destinations to transit, both at the beginning and the end of their trip. And after looking at a variety of potential solutions, the Transportation Committee recommended to staff and then to council that we, one, really focus our goals on that 1 mile radius from the G line stations. So that's focusing on that first mile, last mile connection issue. Encourage private sector micromobility programs. So that's Lime, Lyft, Jump, any of those companies. And then additionally, somewhat related to this, but we won't be touching on it today, is a pilot traffic calming safety program for neighborhoods to try and increase the safety and comfort for people biking and scooting through the neighborhoods. So they also recommended that we regulate these companies with a fee and permit structure, and then that we collect data through the pilot project and report on the performance before making additional decisions. So when we're talking about this 1 mile radius from the G line stations, these circles represent that distance. So part of it, extends into Arvada, part of it goes into our surrounding jurisdictions, part of it's into Denver where they already have micromobility. So for us, we'll get into the details later, but we're really focused on the areas within the city of Arvada that are within this 1 mile circle and radius from the G line stations. So the reason that we're focused on this and looking at potential options for e-bikes and scooters is really when you get down to looking at these transportation times. So to walk 1 mile is roughly 20 minutes. That's a kind of a casual 3-minute per mile pace. Some people walk faster, some people walk slower, so times could be even longer. But then when we think about bicycling and e-scooting at about 12 miles an hour, you cut that distance down, or that time down to 5 minutes. So that becomes much more likely that somebody would be willing to do a 5-minute scooter trip to get to the transit station to then go to their destination than walking 20 minutes. And some stations we have ample parking, some we don't. And so trying to provide extra options for people to get to the transit stations and encourage that use. Additionally, within this area, there's a few bus routes, but they mainly serve the major roads. And especially now with COVID-19 adjustments that RTD's made, they're low frequency. So if you live within the neighborhood, you've got to walk, bike somewhere to one of these bus stops on the main corridor, and then take that bus route to the train station, which may or may not be directly where you're going, which may not get there as frequently as you need. And so we're looking at these other options to make it more convenient for people to access transit within the city. So just to kind of give a brief history about micromobility as a whole, started in Denver in 2008 with BCycle, which actually no longer exists. In May of 2018, e-scooters and bikes appeared in Denver. And so you may be familiar with these devices in Denver, and in a lot of these cities, the companies kind of threw their devices on the streets without asking for permission, without having any rules and regulations. And it was a bit of a chaotic scene in Denver and across the country. So since then, other cities, Aurora, Lakewood, have set rules and regulations. The Colorado legislature passed a bill allowing e-scooters to operate in the roadway. And then starting last year in April, city staff presented to city council about this concept of what we're calling a mobility innovation zone along the G line corridor, and where we could look to serve scooters and bikes as a pilot project. So since then, our public works department and the city's parks department teamed up together to look at allowing electric devices on trails. So not only these rental ones, but if you have your own e-bike, technically they weren't allowed on trails yet. So we went through that process with the public, intercept surveys, speak up Arvadas, and gathered that a lot of people did support these devices for a broad range of reasons, including older residents wanting access and ability to go on longer trips. We presented this information to City Council in January, which was well supported and received. And then since then, we've kind of been preparing for this process where we're starting a series of 4 public meetings on this proposed shared micromobility pilot project. And then the rest of the year will be going through the process of getting this project to launch if it is supported and goes through. So next we're going to talk about shared micromobility. What is it? Why does the city want it? Information about the pilot project, and then what our process is in community engagement. And if you're not familiar, the pictures on the bike on the right kind of show scooters and e-bikes that may be coming to the city. So in general, micromobility is conventional bike sharing, which was like BCycle, if you're familiar with that, in Denver and Boulder. Dockless bike sharing and scooters, which is what's out on the streets of Denver and a lot of cities now. And then it also includes other small personal mobility devices. So it doesn't have to be a rental device. If you have your own e-bike or e-scooter, that also kind of falls into micromobility. When we start talking about shared micromobility in Arvada, we're specifically talking about the dockless bikes and scooters. And so that's really what our pilot project and the rest of this presentation will be geared towards. So thinking about this and how this solution could benefit residents and visitors alike, we looked at what are the benefits for the user. So the main one is that it's on-demand 24/7 transportation. So you're not limited by a bus schedule or a train schedule, just as like, your personal car. You can get out there and find one of these devices and use it whenever you want. Another benefit of the dockless systems versus a docked system is that it's point-to-point trips. So there's one in your neighborhood and you want to go directly to the Old Town Station, you can go directly there, park it at that point, and go continue on with your trip. And so that's one of the big benefits of the dockless system, is that you get to go exactly where you want to. It's relatively low cost for the user, and then it's pretty simple, easy to use. You don't have to do anything more than signing up on an app, and then you can get there, use your phone, and unlock the bike or scooter for your trip. So that's kind of the benefits for the user. For the city, as we're looking to solve this first mile, last mile connectivity issue, it's low impact to city infrastructure. You can imagine the weight of a 50-pound bike or scooter versus large trucks, cars, vehicles. It has a very low impact. A lot of our city streets have bike lanes and sidewalks and trails. They could obviously all be improved, but the infrastructure exists for these, for people to use these devices. There's no cost to the city, and so we'll touch on this a little bit later, but we're not paying these companies, we're not buying these devices, we're not spending any large tax dollars, revenue sources towards this program. The money that we are expecting to spend for administrative reasons, to deal with issues that arise, to help with small related investments such as parking, is going to be covered by fees from the companies that are interested in operating within the city. So next I'm going to switch gears into our pilot project and talk about the rules and regulations, operations, funding, and then the public feedback and data. So to start with, within our pilot project, we're not planning to open this up to every scooter company that wants to come in. We're planning to limit it to only 2 companies, maximum could be 1 company. Any interested vendor will be required to submit an application. The city will review these, score them, and select the vendors that meet and exceed the city criteria. And those vendors will be operating under a revocable permit. So if they say they're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then once they start, they're not doing anything, they're not being responsive to complaints, issues, they're not resetting bikes and scooters every day, they're kind of leaving them everywhere, then we have the right to revoke their permit and immediately shut down their operations. And then if they wanted to restart up, they would have to prove to us what their new plan is and how they're going to do better. Each of these 2 companies will be allowed to deploy up to 200 devices total and a maximum of 100 bikes and 100 scooters. So the maximum amount of devices that would be operating in the pilot project timeframe would be 400. And the reason is this: we don't want them to be overwhelming the city. We want to make sure that there's a mix between scooters and bikes, so that different people with different skill levels and tolerance levels have access. And then there will also be kind of recommendations for potential ADA devices that people who have disabilities can also use. So we'll be using technology to limit the service area within that 1 mile radius zone, and we'll show a little bit more in detail what those borders are going to be. But basically, using geodata, we can kind of limit where people can ride with the electric assist and where they're allowed to park, so they won't be able to continue to expand out of this area. The one caveat to that is that we're coordinating with our neighboring jurisdictions to see how they want to handle spillover. So if one jurisdiction says they're okay with operations there as long as the companies pick them up, then that border might not be as firm, but that would be up to the jurisdictions, and we're coordinating with them. So I just wanted to kind of touch base on this pilot project zone. These circles, I kind of start out with our 1 mile radius, but they don't really take into account street borders, neighborhood borders, activity centers, parks, etc. So we took this kind of 1 mile radius circle and then expanded it and kind of lined it up with a hard border that's more based on the circles and then the next collector. So it pretty much falls in line with these circles on the north side, and then maybe one street up to try and make sense of where people want to go and where they expect to be able to use these and not. So it makes sense that it's not just cutting through half a street or half a house. So this is our proposed area. It's about 7 square miles. So it's about 4 miles from Ward Road to Tennyson Street. And then you've got, a mile or so north and south, depending on the exact area. So it is a zone that, would take over 2 hours potentially to walk from one side to the other. And whereas a scooter, it could be 30, 45 minutes, scooter or bike. So that's kind of why we're focusing on this whole area. As I mentioned, the devices will only be allowed to park in the pilot project area. And so if you took one out, the electric assist would turn off. And then when you tried to park, it would say you can't park here, and you would have to bring it back within that zone. And so that's how we're going to try and keep these devices within that area and keep them from expanding to other places in Arvada, but outside of that zone. We'd also want to clarify that, like, within the new pedestrian mall area in Old Town, that electric assist will turn off so people aren't speeding through areas where it's heavily pedestrianized, and the hours of operations are planned to be 24/7. So there wouldn't be a limit on when a person could take this device. So if you were working a service job or you had hours that got out late after the train stopped, you would still have another transportation option, just as a personal vehicle. So in terms of where it's okay to operate, Old Town sidewalks and that Ped Mall area are going to be kind of prohibited. So within the Ped Mall, you could use it, but it would just be a kick scooter or a regular bike. There wouldn't be any electric assist, so the speeds would be significantly decreased. Bike lanes encouraged, and sidewalks and trails, if bikes are permitted, then scooters would be permitted as well. And so within Arvada, bikes are allowed on all sidewalks unless explicitly prohibited. So scooters will be allowed to ride everywhere, obviously having to yield to pedestrians, same as bicyclists do. And then City Council is in the process of adopting an ordinance to allow the use of electric assist bicycles and scooters on trails. And that's the process that I mentioned earlier with parks that we went through, a big public process and coordinating with City Council on. So to touch on our fee structure, it's going to be related to how big the system grows. So the companies will be required to submit an annual permit application and fee. And then the more vehicles or rides that are occurring, the more that they would be paying for that permit. And so the thought process there is that as the system, or if the system grows, then there would be more administration for the city. There'd be more things to deal with. And so it's going to cost more. And so those companies are going to need to pay for that cost to the city to cover those costs and deal with violations. So the fees will be used to cover staff time to administer the program, provide additional infrastructure such as bike racks and designated parking areas, which we'll touch on next, and support other infrastructure changes to city streets to make riding a bicycle or scooter more comfortable and safe. And so I'm going to turn it over to Derek, who is our parking coordinator, to talk a little bit more about parking with this program.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So clearly we are aware that one of the top concerns around this micromobility project, if not the top concern itself, is the parking of these devices. The concern being related to the potential for the disorganized scattering of devices by users without regard to where they should place them when they are done using them. So due to this, we have done our research by learning from what worked and what did not work in other cities surrounding us with shared micromobility programs such as these. So to avoid some of the potential pitfalls in regards to the parking of these shared devices, we're focusing on creating easy to navigate designated parking areas similar to the ones you kind of see here on this slide, especially at our high destination areas where the curb space is tighter, such as in Old Town. These established parking areas are low cost, quick, and easy to build, and they provide the expectation for users of where to park the devices when they are done with them. So we want to encourage users to park their devices out of the way of pedestrians in bike racks and in other outline designated areas. So users must take a picture of where the device is parked at the conclusion of their trip as part of ending their session. And in addition to establishing parking areas highlighted on the previous slide, they will be allowed on wider sidewalks where at least 4 feet of space can remain per ADA standards, as well as on the street in the gutter pan area, on hardscape areas between the roadway and sidewalk, or other paved areas. Under no circumstances are the devices allowed to be parked on the grass or near natural surfaces where there are trees. As mentioned on the previous slide, parking will be encouraged in designated areas at the bike racks.
And yeah, thanks, Derek. This is something we'll be strongly and closely monitoring and partnering with the selected vendors if the program moves forward about how this is being followed, where the issues are, and what we can do to kind of encourage and educate people to properly park these devices at the end of their trips. So in terms of the requirements, the companies will need to follow the rules and regulations, or their permit can be revoked and service suspended. They are required to have staff in Arvada to respond proactively and proactively review and relocate bikes and scooters as needed, respond to complaints in a timely manner. Additionally, the scooters and bikes have the local company contact info on them physically, and in addition, they also have that information in an app, so there's a quick way to contact those companies. The city has also set up this new email address, e-mobility@arvada.org, which was open now for comments during this kind of pre-period. And then if the pilot project launches, it'll be open, and that'll be a way for residents to also contact us in addition to just calling our main number here. So the operations, as the pilot project goes on, the vendors will be required to submit reports to the city, on the number of trips, the geodata on the trip locations, length, time. So this is separated from your individual person or user. It just kind of aggregates all that information, and we can see where are people taking these trips if they are, how long are they going, what the time is, and that'll help us kind of figure out where this program can expand or if it needs to shrink after the pilot period. And we'll also be monitoring data about complaints, calls, issues, other items. Our pilot project period is intended to last 6 to 9 months, depending on launch. So the goal is to include one summer timeframe when the usage is expected to be its highest. So if we get started this summer, it would probably extend 6 months into next spring. And if it started kind of early spring or in late winter, then it would go through next summer. So somewhere in that 6 to 9 month time frame, depending on the start date. And as we mentioned, the city is coordinating with those neighboring jurisdictions about how to handle spillover, devices outside of our boundaries, other issues that may arise. So in terms of our process to launch, we're in the middle of our 4 public engagement events. So this is the second public meeting. We've got our online survey for feedback via Speak Up Arvada, and we've gotten a lot of feedback there already. Also have that email address open. If we get to the point that this is moving forward, before launch, our vendors will be required to do engagement outreach. If you can see in these photos, this one's from Portland, where they had the companies out there kind of speaking to users, letting them test it out, find out about helmets and all that kind of information. There's still some additional administrative items, include ordinance adoption, regulations and permitting, structure and approval by council that needs to happen before the program launches. We need to get into this implementation of those preferred parking zones, as we saw in pictures earlier on. And then the goal would be, as of now, would be a late summer, early fall launch of the pilot program. So just to touch base more specifically on funding again, we've seen this question and comment come up quite often since we kind of opened the discussion. The city is not paying for scooter bike share companies to operate within the city. We're not buying the equipment. There's no major funding going towards this project, which is one of the benefits when compared and looked at doing a traditional bike share system or even a circulator, bus, et cetera. All those things have both capital cost and operations costs, whereas these dockless systems don't. The fees kind of go from the vendor to the city to cover the cost of the program, and then anything in addition is user to company. Those companies will be paying fees based on the number of devices, so more devices, more permit fees, And then that funding is going to be used to support direct and indirect program expenses. So to think about moving forward, let's say this program launches, we go through the 6 to 9 month pilot project. And at that time frame, we'll have all of our reports, and then the goal is going to be to use that data to make a recommendation to either say, yes, this has been a success, people like it, it's getting used, it's reaching its intended goals of increasing transit access and other mobility options, or it failed, it didn't reach its goals, we're getting a lot of complaints, it's not worth it, let's go ahead and just shut it down. So this data will be analyzed and presented to City Council in a report and presentation. That'll include trip and usage information, public feedback during the project, both complaints and support, operators' responsibility and program and following program rules. So did our operators do what they said they were going to do? Were they good business partners and community partners? And lastly, information about safety data, if there was any crashes, any information like that. So we're here on our second public meeting. We've got 2 more next week. Here's the link if you're not familiar to Speak Up Arvada. This will be posted on the web pages, so you can kind of get in there and click this link, or you can just go to speakuparvada.org, and the shared micromobility project is on that main page. As I mentioned, if you don't want to sign up for Speak Up, you can just send us comments directly to emobility@arvada.org, and our public comment period is going to be open until Sunday, May 16th at 11:59. And so that's about a month after we opened our initial process. So with that, I will stop sharing the screen and say thank you, and we can have a little discussion and answer any questions that come up. Rachel, did you want to go through that? You might be muted.
Yep. Thank you. Sorry. So the first question is, who specifically are you working with in Wheat Ridge?
Mark Westberg is the staff member that we're working with over there.
Thank you. Next question, prohibiting parking of the scooters and bikes outside of the designated area. Is this something widely supported by the potential vendors?
We haven't talked directly for them, but it's not really up to them. It's up to the city for setting our own rules. And so there's lots of other cities that have done this during their pilot period, where they're kind of marking where these devices are allowed to operate. And then the operator knows where their devices are going to be. And then also we can kind of control that they're not going to expand all over the city, which would be a direct failure of the pilot project.
Okay. Where are companies who are interested in bidding able to find the RFP?
None of that information has been released yet. So our process right now is we're gathering public feedback if there's support from the public to initiate this project. So at this point, it's not a done deal that this is definitely going to happen. We're getting public input on that, and if we have support from the public, then there'll be a public release of procurement.
Thank you. How are these units recharged after use?
It's a good question. So it's a little bit different, and it's up to each individual operator. But a lot of the companies, so the business model has changed a little bit now. So let's say Bird, if you're familiar, has produced these devices. There'll be somebody in Arvada that says, hey, I want to be a businessman and I want to operate, or businesswoman, and want to operate this company. And so they can kind of sign up with Bird, and they're responsible for charging those devices. So sometimes in the past, they've had kind of a whole group of people who want to sign up, that it's kind of just community driven, and you would go pick up 10 devices, charge them at your house, you'd get some kind of payment from the company, and then put them back out in the right places. So it depends on the business model, but it's up to the operator to charge them kind of at the end of each day as needed.
Thank you. Will there be a helmet requirement?
No, we're not planning to have a helmet requirement. We're following kind of same laws similar to bicycling. So these devices, you can't be a scooter or e-bike rider if you're under 16, as far as I know, unless you're with a parent. So kind of if you're older than 16, there isn't a helmet law for bicycling, so it would follow the same process there. But the companies there will be an option for if you want a helmet of your own that you can kind of work with the companies to get. And the city will be happy to kind of reach out with some of our business partners that work in the bike industry to provide helmets at a cost, not free, just to clarify.
Has the city already been in discussions with any particular operators?
I wouldn't say discussions. We've definitely have had companies reach out to us since 2019 when I've been here, kind of since this first opened up. So we're not having any discussions with anybody because this is open to the public for feedback now. And then once we open up our procurement, we'll go through the official channels to have conversations and answer any questions with interested suppliers and vendors.
Okay. So no cost to the city. Who is paying for and painting the parking stations?
Right. So that will be done by our city public staff work. As we mentioned, the permit fees that will be new and paid by the vendors to the city for operations will then go and cover those costs. So we're not using any of our existing funding. It's all going to be covered by the permit fees.
If someone breaks a rule, are they forbidden to rent again? And how is that monitored?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and it's going to be part of our discussions with the vendors. As far as I know right now, if you use a device and park it illegally, I don't think you're banned by that vendor, but depending on what you're doing, it might be different. Like if you threw a scooter into a creek and they know that you were the last user and you didn't end your trip, then maybe that's something that they do. But the city doesn't have a way at this point to do that. But we will be talking with our vendors about how they kind of restrict or punish or keep people in line from repeatedly doing offenses. So thanks for that question.
Okay. How does the system work in not allowing the device to operate outside the 1 mile zone or an old town? Is there a sensing device in each unit? And if they go outside the 1 mile radius, can they use the unit manually?
Yeah, good question. So if you can just kind of think about, like just a map that is a GPS map. And so the devices have GPS tracking in them. And so the company can kind of use technology and computer mapping to say this is the border. And once that GPS is outside of that border, then the electric assist will turn off. So you could technically go outside the border and kick push your scooter, but then when you tried to park it, it wouldn't turn off. So your trip would continue. You would continue paying money until you were able to return back within the 1 mile pilot project zone and park and end your trip. And so, I guess technically it's feasible, but it would cost a lot of money. And then if you didn't end your trip, you would be paying forever. And then the vendor can also see where the bikes are. And so they could go and pick it up, bike or scooter, pick it up and put it back into the pilot project zone.
Okay. Once procurement opens up, if the public approves, where would a vendor find the RFP?
I don't have the exact answer. Our procurement team will post it through, I think we use BidNet. Mm-hmm. And so that's where it would be posted and available. Yeah. But if you have a direct question, you can email us at that e-mobility email address and we can get back to you.
Yeah. This might be another one to just email directly, but what price range do you anticipate the per vehicle fee will be, and on what time period, like monthly, for the duration of the pilot program, I think for a vendor?
Yeah, all that information will be released with the procurement process. So that'll all be included at that time.
So if the public votes or supports expanding the pilot test outside of the proposed zone, would you expand the test area?
Yeah, I mean, at this time, our goal is to do this pilot project within this area, and then this is subject to change, but we would allow scooters completely within the city. And so they could expand all the way up to Candelas in the west, Leiden, and then same kind of all the way down to this area in the south and the east. So it would go from here to citywide.
We have a comment, and I'll come back to it, but I'm going to do some of the more questions first. So will the city be working with Arvada businesses on sponsorships to offer passes to employees or residents?
That's a good question. We haven't discussed that yet. It's something we can definitely see if there's interest for that, and then talk with our vendors about how that operates. As far as I'm aware right now, it's kind of like an individual membership where you sign up with your credit debit card and then you're using it and it's being filled to your account. I think I might have read somewhat recently that there's kind of trip passes and things like that. So we can definitely explore that option as the program gets up and running.
Okay. Can you take the scooter or the bike from zone to zone? So if you hop on at Ward Road, and then can you take it to Old Town? And then return it there? Yeah, so if you get a scooter at Ward Road, and then ride it to Old Town, can you return it in Old Town, or do you have to return it at the Ward Road where you originally picked it up?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that is definitely allowed. So for reality and the way this program would operate, everywhere in this pilot project zone it's just one zone. So everywhere within this red border, you can park, start, finish, and travel outside of the Old Town kind of Ped Mall area. We'll have a little bit different rules, but you can take it from the west side to the east side. And the Wheat Ridge station is kind of really why we're partnering with Wheat Ridge to talk to them about this, since we anticipate more access to that G line station area and the new developments around there. It's kind of rough to have this area but not have the station included. So that's one of our big goals as we talk with Wheat Ridge. But yeah, anywhere within this zone you can start and end a trip.
Okay. BCycle would allow users access to the Boulder system and in Denver if it starts up again. Will that added benefit be taken into consideration as part of the RFP?
I'll do my best to answer that, but we're not proposing anything BCycle related. It's going to be all that dockless system. So your dockless system account, so whether it's Lime, Bird, Jump, something else, it's one account that works across the country. So if you fly to California, you can use it there. If you're in New York, you can use it there. Denver, Boulder, wherever they have these devices, it's just one account that you're able to have access to all of the devices. So.
Okay, so that's all the questions I have. If anyone else wants to jump in here, we can take another couple questions.
If not, just want to say thanks to everybody for participating. Appreciate all the good questions. And we'll be sure to use kind of our speak up as much as you can, as we'll be putting out information on that, on the project, if it goes forward, what our next steps are and things like that. So there will be always information there.
Adam, can you repeat the email or show the slide again with the how to follow the project and contact the team?
Yeah, give me just a second. So it's e-mobility@arvada.org, and I'll show that right now. So there's the email address and the speak up. It's a long speak up address, but you can just get to speakup.arvada.org and you can find our shared micromobility project there.
And we always record these meetings and post them within about a week of having the meeting. We already have our first, the video from our first presentation is already up on Speak Up Arvada. So if you didn't catch something today, you can watch the recording at another time.
Yeah, and just to clarify, all the meetings are the same presentation. It's the same information. So the exact words we say might be a little bit different, but you're not going to miss out on anything from one presentation to another. So welcome to join more, but it's all the same information. Great. Well, everybody, thanks for attending, using your lunch hour, and we will see you at the next one.